All right, I guess we're gonna get started. So here, I will start with the slide. Go ahead.
So a little bit about Sanjeevani. Sanjeevani for You is a nonprofit organization that provides free 24/7 advocacy and support regarding mental health and domestic abuse issues or concerns. Um, Sanjeevani for You also provides actionable tools and resources to help you make informed choices.
All right, and then my name is Dia, and I go by she, her pronouns.
I'm Sanvi. I also go by she, her pronouns.
I'm Pyle. I also go by she, her pronouns.
All right. And then I just want to start by introducing the issue that we're talking about today. So we are talking about the LGBTQ community, which stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, and then I interchangeably use the terms LGBTQ plus and queer when talking about this. Queer is kind of like an overarching umbrella term when talking about these things. So don't get confused if I'm kind of going back and forth between those terms. And then I have all my sources in these slides, just to clarify that they're all from credible sources. So I just want to start with some facts about LGBT, like the LGBT community. An estimated 3.5% of adults in the United States identify as LGBT or LGB, I guess, and an estimated 0.3% of adults are transgender. This implies like that sounds like a small percentage. And when I read that at first, I was a little surprised, but that is 9 million people and a figure roughly equivalent to the population of New Jersey. So it's a lot of people that identify with this community. And then specifically the issues we're talking about today are being BASI and queer, having both identities at once. And there is a lot of stigma behind being part of the LGBT community and also being Indian. It's almost like you can't be both. There's a lot of like talking, there's a lot of gossip, and it is very difficult. It's something that is even difficult to present on because there is just so much stigma behind both identities and in our community. And that's kind of what we're here to like bring light to today.
Yeah, so like Dia was saying, there's a lot of stigma in our community regarding identifying as a part of the LGBT community. And this really negatively impacts the LGBT youth and families in our community. At Sanjeevani for You, in the past 24 months, we've received 4 phone calls, and some of these phone calls have been from parents asking whether there's a doctor who can fix their child since they identify with the LGBT community. And this really takes a toll on families mentally and emotionally.
It's something that is so deeply like stigmatized to the point where it tears apart families. And the fact that we get so many calls about this and the fact that this is something that's so like repeatedly brought up is why we're doing this event today and why we're trying to normalize it rather than make it further stigmatized. Let's see, why is it not letting me go to the next step? There we go. All right, so a minute, sorry. Go. Okay, so basically I wanted to kind of talk about like why we have the stigma in the first place. So there is these things aren't necessarily perpetuated by evil motives. It like nobody is really like the reason we have this is because homosexuality in India especially was taught as a disease. People were often like referred to psychiatrists if they had homosexual tendencies, and it was not viewed as an identity. The LGBT community was not a community, it was mental illness. Like it was, and I have this source at the bottom from a peer reviewed article that kind of talks about this in more detail and like does several studies about like the LGBT community in India. But basically, this quote says modern medicine and psychiatry in India, despite their dependence on and slavery to Western thoughts, ideas, diagnostic clarifications, and treatment options, continues to be reluctant to empathetically support these liberal sexual norms for the country due to local religious and social orthodoxy. So I think that quote kind of sums up the culture. And I think that these negative connotations with the LGBT community and all like especially in India, what happens is when you grow up hearing how wrong something is, when you go as far as to like it was like homosexuality like was completely like illegal until 2018 in India. And when you grow up and hear about something being illegal, being a mental illness, hear about the community and only like hushed whispers and gossips, like you're going to internalize that one way or the other. Like even coming to a new country like here, like you're going to internalize that one way or another. And things like that are generational. So even members of the LGBT community, like especially like in the Desi LGBT community, like they view what they're doing as wrong. They start to view their own identity as wrong by watching like older people and other people in the community talk about LGBT community and like the issues and things like that. Like they start to kind of subconsciously or consciously view what they're doing as wrong. A lot of like LGBT people like struggle to even come to terms with their sexuality. They won't even come out until they're much older in life or have already been married, or they won't understand like what's wrong with them when the reality is they're just not attracted to the opposite sex. And there's also a lot of shame that comes with the identity. Maybe they will come, they'll realize it, but they'll feel nothing but shame and not want to come out because of the stigma. And I think that internalized homophobia kind of goes both ways, where it affects people of the LGBT community as well as it affects people who grew up like hearing how wrong these things are. And I think on both ends, it creates a lot of problems and it contributes to that stigma. Another argument that I see being made.
Yeah, so another issue is that being queer in India was actually very widely accepted, if not celebrated, until the effects of colonization. So we see this as kind of a stark contrast, because we see Desi families and modern Desi ideals placing negative stereotypes on the LGBTQ plus community. However, being queer is rooted in a lot of traditional Desi ideals before they were corrupted by Western imperialism. So in this way, Hinduism allows homosexual relationships, and being queer was actually widely accepted until the effects of colonization. It's been a very big part of our culture and our way of life. However, the argument against it is constantly made by Desi queer people and by parents and generations and generations. And we have a lot of historical and factual evidence to back this up. So one historian, Harbans Mukhia, says, one has to know India's history to understand why the British made gay sex illegal. The British brought their own rules to India, including the Section 377, which banned homosexuality and made it a criminal act. This law was enforced by them, but it didn't conform with India's attitude toward homosexuality. It was more to do with their Christian belief systems, he says. And this is a BBC article if you want to learn more about it. But I think it's kind of telling how far ingrained these stereotypes go, because I had no idea that history existed. Our parents aren't taught that. They don't teach us that. And it's kind of interesting how we condemn a lot of the Western ideals that were brought to India, but we kind of enforce this one. And so another issue or another piece of evidence is that there was a temple complex built between 950 and 1050 CE by the Chandala dynasty. The erotic sculptures in the temple vividly depicted homosexuality, and other temple art of the same fashion can also be seen in a 13th century Sun temple in Konark in the eastern state of Orissa, and Buddhist monastic caves at Ajanta and Ellora in the western state of Maharashtra.
And then,
yeah.
The term basically homosexuality and the laws prohibiting unnatural sex were imposed across the world through imperial might. They were, it must be kept in mind, products of minds that were deeply influenced by the sexist sin stance of the Christian Bible. So basically what we're trying to say is that there is so much history and so much evidence that is, again, not taught to us, that is basically completely hidden. And there's endless evidence that like being queer and being Indian was actually a very valid identity. And that despite the drastic effects of colonization throughout our history, being queer has always been a part of our culture, and it always will be a part of our culture. And then in conclusion, so we've gone over some of the history and we've gone over some of the internalized homophobia and what contributes to the stigma, but there is really no simple solution to the problem with identifying as both Desi and queer. Like there is no solution, no simple solution. We basically we just want to work towards making LGBT Desi people more comfortable in their identity and making the Desi community as a whole more queer accepting. And the proper way to go about doing this is to, one, question homophobic thoughts, which is what we did at the beginning of this presentation, recognized our own internalized homophobia, whether it's more direct thoughts or more of that unconscious homophobia, and understand the history and the context behind Indian LGBT issues. And that way we can begin to create a safe space for Desi queer people in our communities.
And I think what comes with that is the process of unlearning, unlearning the maybe bias you have towards or against LGBTQ people that you've learned in school, through laws, through your parents. I think that process of unlearning is difficult, but it's the only way that we can, begin to accept LGBTQ plus people into the Desi community. And so you also might be wondering, on another note, actually on a very similar note, why we introduced ourselves with our pronouns at the beginning of this presentation, and they're also in our Zoom names. Well, and you may have thought that, well, that's obvious, but by identifying our pronouns and ensuring that they are respected, we are fostering an inclusive environment which could affirm the gender identity of a person who doesn't necessarily use pronouns associated with the gender binary, which are traditional she or he pronouns, or could affirm the identity of someone who's transgender. Using the wrong pronouns for someone and failing to respect their identity can be offensive and harmful. Just as someone identifying you with the wrong belief or with the wrong statement can offend you and can make you feel like you're not accepted, the same thing applies here. It can imply that people who are transgender, non-binary, or don't conform to a gender don't exist. And contrary to what a lot of us grew up believing and knowing, gender is not explicitly divided along the binary lines of man and woman, as sex and gender are different. Some people don't identify with the gender at all, and some identify with multiple. And it's important that we respect those identities and remember that our opinions or beliefs or things we are taught to us by previous generations should not govern the lives of others and should certainly not violate their rights and how we respect them. And so regardless of what you think or grew up believing, it's important that you respect someone's pronouns and by extension, their dignity. And just one more thing, some common pronouns include he, she, and they. A person who identifies as non-binary is likely to use they/them pronouns, in which case they refer to a singular person. So like in use, for example, you would say, Alex went to the store today, or you would say, they went to the store today. I like talking to Alex about their day. I wish I was closer to Alex, or I wish I was closer to them. So that's an example of how we can use they, them pronouns and just why they should be respected. And as it states here in the presentation, asking someone's, not only letting other people know about your pronouns, but asking people before you address them with something is really beneficial because it normalizes it for people who may use unconventional pronouns or may be transgender. And if you have a social media account, even adding your pronouns into your bio can be really helpful and create a safe space in our community and especially in our Desi community.
Finally, so some final words. Nobody should have to pick which community or which identity that they should be proud of and which community that they should be allowed to identify with and feel as if they're always compromising a part of their identity. You can be proud of both your sexuality and of your culture and not face shame for one or the other.
So ways to get help. We have a 24/7 helpline available. You can text the first number listed or call the second number. You can also email info@stjuvenieforyou.com if that's easier. We also have a chat on our website, and you can also make an appointment to receive help or support.
All right, we're now taking any questions.
Dia, we have some questions which has been shared by chat.
All right. Should I stop screen sharing?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So, all right. So some questions we have. The first one being, what can family do and what can family do to help if their child identifies as gay or lesbian? I would answer this by saying that I think that all honestly acceptance is key. Just feeling like your parents aren't going to accept you for who you are as a person is a devastating feeling in any way, and I think that just being accepting of it, like not questioning it, not treating it as a phase, just purely like pure acceptance, like treat it as if your child came out as straight. Like I understand like there's this huge stigma in this community, but it all starts at home, and if it's something that like building that identity up at home and like helping some like a child feel confident in who they are at home will help them face any stigma in the community. um
And even more than that, I think doing your own research is very important. I know a lot of people in the Desi community, they don't know a lot about what members who are in the LGBTQ plus community face. They don't know about the issues that they face and the hardships they have to go through. So maybe learning about it, and also just realizing that your child is the same person they were before they came out. Now they're just more confident and they are able to fully be who they are. This isn't anything that's going to hurt them. It's not anything that's wrong with them. It's actually something that's going to make it, that coming out is going to make them feel happier and stronger and confident and more themselves. And why would you not want a child who's more of themselves?
Yeah, I agree with Dia and Sanvi. At the end of the day, your child is still your child, and you should just love them and accept them for who they are.
exactly, yeah. The next question we have is what does LGBTQ mean? I briefly said this at the beginning of the presentation, but I can address it again. So LGBTQ plus stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and then Q is queer. Queer is kind of an umbrella term. Sometimes if people are like not really sure like what label fits them best, they'll be like, oh, I'm queer, or in general, like it is like it's just an umbrella term really. And that's kind of why I used it interchangeably throughout our presentation. um the next question is, why is there stigma within certain communities such as South Asians? And I'll let Sanvi and I'll answer this.
Okay, so I can start off. So I think we kind of addressed this in our presentation, but I think the reason the stigma exists is just because of, at least I'll speak from like my perspective, what our parents and their parents and their parents grew up with. For instance, in India or in South Asia, where being a member of the community was banned for a very, very long time until recently, where gay marriage was illegalized. And when something's illegal, it creates a norm in society, or it rather like um, negates that norm. It makes something seem wrong, and it makes you not want to associate with anyone who does that wrong thing. You'll consider it a bad influence. So even though now it's legalized, and even though we know after this presentation that that homophobia isn't actually rooted in the origins of Desi and Indian culture, and that it was perpetuated by Western beliefs, that influence still exists. And I think that's why the stigma is there. And also because in the Desi community, appearance seems to have a really big role. You know, aunties gossip, you know, that's what aunties do. And because of this negative view and perspective of being a member of the community, a lot of times parents feel ashamed of themselves and their kids, and they feel like they've raised their kids wrong because they view being a member of the LGBTQ community as wrong. So I think to get rid of that stigma and to get rid of the effects that come with it, including all of that gossip, which just harms the child even more, you just have to realize that it's nothing abnormal. It is normal. You know, 9 million people in the United States identify as LGBTQ. In 1300 CE, there were statues displaying homosexual sex in temples. So it is normal and it is celebrated. And I think that's the way to end the stigma.
Exactly. And I do want to like, I think that was like perfectly summed up, but I do want to just add and say, like, if it was so normalized in our culture once, it very much can be normalized like that again. And I think that just even something as small as like a presentation like this, it just puts the idea, like starts to get that out there, that word out there. And I think that like time, generations will begin to normalize it again, you know. And then the next question is, can anyone who is identified as LGBTQ plus reach out to be emotionally supported? And I think we also mentioned this in our PowerPoint, that that our organization has like a 24/7 helpline, a text line, you can make appointments. Like this is definitely a good, safe space for anybody who's struggling with their sexuality. Like I think we can all agree that this is a safe space. And the reason we're doing this is so people are aware that this organization is a safe space. But other places to reach out, I guess, would be the Trevor Project. I don't ever recommend calling the suicide hotline, just because they tend to put people on hold for a long time. I've heard a lot of stories like that. I don't usually recommend it. And then I always personally like think that the crisis text line, I've heard a lot of good things. I volunteered with them before actually, and I can say like they are very trained on numerous issues. And that's a good place for people who aren't necessarily comfortable with talking. It's a good place to just type. And then I think one more would be Tricone. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce this one. It's based in Chicago, and it's a great organization to support LGBTQ for South Asians. So those are just some organizations and some places to reach out. But again, there are like endless places to reach out, like really. And then the next question is that some people think that this like can be treated, that they still have that like it's a disease mindset. And then what is like our message to them? And again, I'll let Sanvi and Payal answer this one, if you guys have any thoughts on it.
Yeah, I can go first. So identifying as a part of the LGBT community, as we previously mentioned, it's not a disease. It's not something to fix. It's just your child really understanding who they really are and figuring out who they really are. It's not something new. It's just them figuring out who they are. I know I repeated myself, but yeah.
Yeah, and going off of what Pyle said, also, and we can reinforce this knowledge by the fact that we know conversion therapy does not work. We know all it does is harm your mind. And what Pyle said, it's just your child being who they are. It's something that's innate. You can't fix it. Just like in the same way, like if you really like a certain food, if you're really good at something, if you like the way your personality is, you can't fix that. That's just who you are. It's it's a defining characteristic. You can't change that.
Exactly. Like people need to realize like sexuality is not a choice. I don't love that saying because I think it implies that like if people could choose, they would choose to be straight, like by justifying it as like blandly as to say, oh, it's not a choice, but it really isn't a choice. Like, and like treating like in general, just understanding that it's not something that like Sanvi said, like we know like there is repeated evidence out there that conversion therapy does not work. It does not work. There is no like evidence that it is that anybody has like positively been affected by it. And in fact, there's a lot of people that will come out and speak about like surviving it and how traumatizing it can be. And I think that's the last thing any well-meaning parent would want to do to their kid. And we would hate to see that like happen to somebody because, their parents couldn't get out of the old mindset and like adapt and change. And I think that's why we have to, again, keep normalizing it so people don't think like this, because this thinking can actually be dangerous for some people.
I mean, if someone that or if a parent is going by the logic that they're trying to help their kid and improve their future by quote unquote treating them, like sending them to a conversion therapy camp, we know that the majority of people who leave those camps are not only mentally traumatized but end up taking their own life. And that's not helping your child. That's forcing them to reject who they are. And yeah, I think what Dia said and Pyle said also sums it up really well.
All right. Some people think that a person who identifies as LGBTQ plus looks different. What's our message to them? I would have to say that looks don't mean anything when it comes to your sexuality. Like there is no correlation, quite simply. Like anybody can be part of the community. Anybody can be attracted to anyone. Some people, there are stereotypes, and some people do fit that stereotype, and it's quote unquote more obvious. And some people just don't. They really don't fit that stereotype. They're just not that type of person. And that's okay too. Like people are going to look a certain, like the way people look and the way they identify do not correlate. And I think we realize that more and more. And that's, I think people who don't look that way have trouble coming out because they think people aren't going to take them so seriously. Like, for example, like being very feminine, but coming out as a lesbian, people might be like, no, but you're so pretty. Like that's such a backhanded thing to say. I've heard that so much, like about like somebody, like a girl will come out as gay and they'll be like, wow, but she's so pretty. Like she could attract so many men. Well, she doesn't want to date a man. Like her being like lesbians can, like people in the community can be pretty. They can be attractive. Like there's nothing. And I think that just goes back to this original thought that we have that being part of the community is inherently bad, whether it be the way they look, the way they act, the way they present themselves. Every part of that community is viewed synonymously with bad. And if you guys have anything to add to that.
This is kind of on a different note, but I think in terms of this talk of acceptance, I think if you want to be an ally of the LGBTQ community, I think it's more than just accepting. It's also intently trying to break down these stereotypes and these barriers. And so I think to kind of further our mission and to, if you want to help people and be supportive, I think being accepting is definitely the first step, but I think being anti-homophobic is really important. And I think that's how we can help people the fastest.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
You can go ahead first. Sorry.
I think also educating yourself is a good way to kind of erase the stigmas and maybe spread more awareness or about the issue.
I think a big thing is we keep saying like acceptance, and then Sanvi finally brought up that we have to actually take steps like besides being accepting, and we've been over how important it is to be accepting, but I do want to say some specific steps that I think people can take. We mentioned pronouns, putting pronouns in your bio, bringing pronouns up. It seems like such a small thing. It seems like a performative thing almost, but even having your pronouns in your Instagram bio, like Instagram has an option where you can do that. You don't even have to type it in. It's just like, just doing that makes your account and you a safe space. Like there could be somebody who sees that and they're like, okay, like this person is a safe person for me. And like people who are struggling with their identity and people who are going through that privately, like that means a lot to them. Like that can mean a lot to somebody. And it normalizes it for people who do put that in their bio, because if like cisgender people, that word means that somebody who identifies with the gender and sex that they were assigned at birth. So people who are not cisgender, let's say like they were the only ones to put pronouns in their bio, well then they become kind of a target for transphobic people and homophobic people to go attack. But when we all have it in our bio, it normalizes it. It makes it normal for everybody. So then those people can't get singled out as much. So that's one really, like, it seems so small, but it makes such an impact. And another big thing is when we were talking about like people who look different, I feel like a lot of, and I was saying how everything in the community is synonymous with bad. I did want to add to that. Like I will hear all the time, and this isn't just like in the Indian community, this is in a lot of communities, people will associate the word gay with bad. Like they'll be like, that's gay. Like, and I've learned like, you need to call people out on that. Like just ask, well, why did you just use gay? Like, don't you mean bad? And they'll go, no, I mean gay. And you're like, well, what's bad about being gay? Like question it a little bit, like kind of make them step back and have to explain it to you. And when they explain it, they realize, oh, like I'm saying something homophobic, like whether you think it is or not, like you realize it is. And I think that those are just like two small, like easy things to do. Like supporting the LGBT community and creating a safe space is not a difficult task. It's just knowing how to go about it.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, if everyone says, oh, it's not my place to intervene, it's not my place to stop this, then no one's going to stop it.
Exactly. It is your place. Like if you're just letting your friends say that, like you're homophobic, like for doing, like that's not okay. Like it's like letting your friends say like the N-word, like that's not okay. Like that you're condoning it, and you shouldn't condone like language like that because it can be very harmful. Like what if somebody, like what if one of your friends you were hanging out with and you were saying like that's gay, like to something bad, and they actually were gay? Like imagine how that would feel to hear like their identity being repeatedly like trashed. So I think that's another important point to bring up. And then another question that I will let Sanvi and Payal answer. What emotional concerns goes in the minds of anyone who identifies as LGBTQ when there is no acceptance of who they are?
Well, I think I'll just be brief on this, but primarily, I mean, especially for someone who's emotionally connected to their family, or maybe not even their family, just you've seen so many stories of kids who get kicked out of their own home and ostracized by their parents. I mean, anyways, society discriminates against LGBTQ people. Healthcare programs discriminate with towards LGBTQ people in multiple, not even just the US, in so many more countries. And so I think you think that family and your parents are going to be that safe space for you, who are always going to be there for you. So I think, at least when I think about it, the biggest emotional concern is not knowing whether your parents are going to support you and still love you. I think that's a concern. And then also how you'll be treated, I guess, because if you're not treated by your parents well because of this, then who knows how anyone else is going to treat you? So I think that's a big issue. And also just because it's not normalized and stigmatized, that feeling of there's something wrong with me, I think that takes a huge emotional toll, because it's not something you can fix, right? It's not like, oh, I'm doing bad in this class, so let me study more. It's not that kind of emotional toll. It's a toll on you in that it's like an innate part of yourself which feels wrong, in which society is telling you makes you a bad person. And it's like, well, no, I'm not. And I can't fix this. So now what do I do? So I think that takes a huge emotional toll.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And I think not having acceptance also creates that internalized homophobia we mentioned earlier, like viewing what they do as wrong, not being able to come to terms with their sexuality, and just feeling shame about their identity. I think that all then contributes to negatively impacting their mental health.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think that's why we're doing all of this, is so that people don't have to go through that. They don't have to go through being rejected by their own family. They don't have to go through getting kicked out, conversion therapy, or even the people who are accepted. They still don't have to go through having to pick which community they can identify more with. Am I allowed to be proud of being Indian, or am I allowed to be proud of being that shouldn't be a choice. You should be able to be proud of being both. And there are more questions, but I'm wondering if this is a good place to end, or if we want to go through some more questions. All right. Okay. I think this is a good place to end. Thank you everyone for attending and watching. I once again, sorry, did not prepare the ending of this, but I just want to say thank you to everybody for attending and listening, and thank you to Sanvi and Payal for helping me present this PowerPoint. All right, are we good to officially end?